and welcome to the Always About People show. For those of you that are tuning in live on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Beamer Barnes, reporting live in New York City. And over the past 4 weeks, we've been talking about change management, which sounds so boring and very much like a curriculum at school, which is okay. But change management impacts us every single day within the workplace, in our relationships, all the things. So last week we talked about accountability and how can we foster accountability during times of change? What does that actually look like? 3 things. Think through the impact. What is the strategy of it? Who does this change ultimately impact? Who needs to be involved? Second one, who needs to be involved and how can we incorporate them into the change? And then 3, it's okay to not have all the answers, whether that's individually as a leader, individually as an individual contributor. Times have changed for whatever reason. We have this instinct where we just want to cling to what we know. And it feels safer if we would just do this, and then if they would just do this, and it kind of starts, these pieces start moving together, and it's like weird and combative at times because there's certain people that think they know the answers, and then leaders that are like, I didn't think through that. So how can we foster accountability? Great question, because today we're going to talk about learning and the importance of keeping learning and growth at the forefront during times of change. Daniel Pink wrote in his book, To Sell is Human, this story about how back in the 1970s, there was this researcher who studied students that were majoring in art. And so in this study, they did this research where basically they had about 30 students, and the students needed to paint their still art test curriculum, whatever the case is. And so in that, they observed that there were really 2 types of students. There were the ones that just looked at the object, sat it down, painted it, turned it in, done, accomplished, it's over. But then there were those that almost turned it in late or did turn it in late because they were looking at the object and making sure that the light hit it at the right place and bringing more props into it just to make sure that it was appropriate. They were the students that were more concerned about what it was that they were doing and actually finding a problem. They could just paint it. It's not about solving the problem of just getting the project done, but it's about finding the best way forward. What does that mean? Whenever we have problem solvers, we're just ready to solve the problem. And then those that are like, well, maybe there's a better way of doing things. Those are our learners. Those are the ones that are going to foster learning in our organizations, the ones that are able to think creatively through what a solution can be whenever we are having issues. So let's talk about learning. What stops learning? Why do we avoid it? Let's go back all the way to elementary school for those of you that might be triggered for that. So sorry. But let's just think we're sitting in those weird desks. There's a board up front with a teacher. How do we learn? How did we start learning? A teacher with a preset curriculum. They would teach us, and then how would they make sure that we knew the information? Tests, quizzes, whatever the case is. We knew that we had one. We would cram, get all the information, take the test, pass the test, not pass the test, whatever. But did we retain the information? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. It was really through repetition that we were able to learn whatever that content is. So how does learning impact work? Why does this matter in terms of how we learn or why we learn? Because you cannot foster an environment of learning if we're not willing to change. It's funny whenever you talk to people and you think, they're a know-it-all. But never once do we think, I'm a know-it-all. I know everything. We never think that, because those of us that that want to learn, and we think that we want to learn, oftentimes, do we have the humility? And we talked about that a few weeks ago. Do we have the humility to align ourselves with an organization to foster change? So now that we understand why we stop or why we avoid learning, let's think about how learning impacts change and what we can do to foster learning and growth within our organization during times of just straight up turbulence. One way that we can think about this is actually through innovation. There's this article that was written from, I want to say his name is Jeff Clayton, but it was an HBR study, and he was talking about how innovation is really comprised of 5 things: questioning, associating, experimenting, observation, and networking. So let's break this down. In order for us to practice learning, in order for us to have innovation, which is ultimately thinking outside the box, it requires a level of ambiguity. It needs to remain fresh. To ask questions. Why are we doing it this way? Is this the best way forward? Have we considered it from a different angle? Questioning. Associating. The CEO and founder of BlackBerry, whenever BlackBerry was first established and first founded, he had recently won an Oscar for putting up a barcode on film tape and like how that all worked. He won an Oscar. So why is he starting a phone? Because BlackBerry in itself, for those of you that used to have one, it was because it was the first phone that had email on it. And because he was able to associate this experience of, well, if we can put barcodes on film and then we have this phone, maybe we can get emails onto phones. And at the time, it was like mind-boggling. Who would have thought that you can put, it's not just a phone. Let's put a camera on it. Let's throw in like 18 apps and see what happens there too. Associating happens whenever you allow yourself to think outside the box and go, so if that's how a mechanic does things and bringing people in and out, and we're over here in a dental office and we need to make sure that people are moving and grooving, is there a way to associate the efficiency at the mechanic to the dental? Do you see what I'm saying? I'm just using it as an example. Experimenting. Experimenting means that we're just going to try it. Let's just see. Make sure that anytime that we're experimenting or practicing learning, that we're able to fail above the waterline. So what does that mean? If you have a boat and you know that the sink line is right here, try and poke holes above the sink line. We don't need anything that's going to cause the whole entire boat to sink. So whenever we experiment, is it risky enough to practice innovation and to push us forward, but is it safe enough that it's not going to drown us? Observation. This is like probably the hardest part of learning, is taking the step back and just observing. Randy Dobbs talks about in his book, Transformational Leadership, about how whenever he did come into an organization to be the new CEO, about how he spent about 3 weeks observing and interviewing people and just talking to them. He had all the financial records to be able to see and could have deducted why the company was in the situation that it was in. But instead, he talked to the people because he recognized they're going to be the ones that know what's going on. So let me observe, let me find out what exactly is going on, because the paper can say one thing, the numbers, they don't lie, but maybe there's something else going on that numbers aren't going to necessarily represent. Observation. The 5th one for innovation and learning is networking. Who do we know? How can we engage in different conversations outside of ourselves, outside of our industry, and network? What are they doing well? What do they need help on? Maybe I have a solution that could help them practice innovation and learning. But in order for us to really focus on learning, it's also important to recognize, what are our threats? What stops us from learning? And we recognize why we avoid it. But really, it's because of urgency. It needs to get done right now. We don't have time to practice learning. We just need to get up and go. Like, I don't care what you have to do, just make it happen and make it happen now. And there's this pressure that is put on it. So it's urgent. Maybe we're just really busy, and then we don't have time, or it would take too much time. Remember when we talked about a few weeks ago about how change is difficult, costly, and weird? Remembering that it's also doable, it's rewarding, and it's normal. So that is learning for today. How can we foster a culture of learning during times of change? By practicing ambiguity through questioning, associating, experimenting, observing, and networking. I hope this was helpful. Next week is going to be our last installment of this series, and we are just going to wrap everything up that we've talked about. I appreciate all of you. I hope that you are having a great week, whether you are watching this on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, or if you're watching this on your podcast of choice years in the future. I hope that you will tune in next week, and we will see you soon.